Yeah, in the interest of time, we should start, and I'll just introduce the speaker today and about our webinar series and the series of various webinars we have had in the past. And so, good afternoon from Delhi, and a warm welcome to Renata Ávila, CEO of Open Knowledge Foundation, for the third in a series of webinars on artificial intelligence, markets, and competition. She speaks today on the role of open data in artificial intelligence and competition policy. So just to give you a background, why we are doing these webinars, the ICRIER Process Center for Internet and Digital Economy, where I am right now sitting, has recently released a report on AI markets and competition in India. But we had a deep dive on the international discussions and literature on competition in AI markets and the levers of competition, notwithstanding the fact that there are incumbency advantages of certain technology firms. And open data sets was one issue which we looked at, and that's why we thought of inviting Renata. So we welcome Renata. She's the, as I said, CEO of Open Knowledge Foundation, she's a policy researcher and an advocate of with extensive experience examining how data accessibility influences innovation and growth in emerging digital economies. Her work emphasizes the importance of open data ecosystems in driving inclusive opportunities for technology development and market competition. So as some of us here who are on the panel and speakers, we have Nihar here. I will be shortly joined, I think, by Aalekh. I've asked my colleague to follow up. Open data holds tremendous potential for fostering innovation and leveling the level playing field in AI-driven markets. In our recent report, we highlighted how greater data accessibility can help smaller AI firms to develop cutting-edge solutions while reducing the influence of these incumbent technology firms. The report also underscores that by nurturing data marketplaces, trust in data ecosystems can be strengthened and barriers to AI development reduced. We had an extensive stakeholder consultation for our report, and the stakeholders by and large came from the Indian startup ecosystem. Stakeholders highlighted the importance of privacy preserving AI practices, developing community data sets free from the personally identifiable information, collaborative initiatives to open source large data sets, particularly giving you the Indian context, for Indic languages plays a vital role in democratizing AI innovations, enabling startups, researchers, and the broader AI community to create locally relevant solutions. We look forward to hearing more from Renata about her experiences. Making my task easy is what I envisage to be a very rich discussion. We are joined by Nihar Desai. Hi, Nihar. Thank you for joining us at a very, very short notice. He is a program lead at ARTPARK, and R&D nonprofit within the Indian Institute of Science, Bangalore, where he spearheads language and speech modeling initiatives. He leads Project Vani, India's largest speech data collection initiative, in collaboration with Google DeepMind. This project aims to open source 32,000 plus hours, and this we have taken from your website. It could be much more by now, and you can correct us, of speech data across Indic languages, a transformative step for Indic AI ecosystem. We are also joined by Dr. Moinul Zaber. Moinul Zaber is an old research colleague of mine from Learn Asia, so I'm very glad that we crowdsourced him because he showed interest in this topic. And he's a computational social scientist, AI and machine learning and data science, human-machine interaction and technology, and regulation and policy of the same are his areas of interest. He's currently a visiting academic on interdisciplinary design in the University of Cambridge Computer Science Department. Just a brief introduction about myself. I am Payal Malik, moderator of the session, a visiting professor to the ICRIER Process Center, and was formerly advisor economics and head of economics at the Competition Commission of India for almost a decade between 2012 to 2023. I now request Renata to just start with her presentation, and the floor is yours.
Well, good morning, and I'm honored and humbled, to be among such excellent experts. I think that usually our words do not collide or do not even connect adequately. It is usually, non-for-profit organizations, so usually walk a very separate walk than the very important discussions of markets and competitions. It is wrongly, I think, the word of philanthropy and the word of social good and AI for social good and AI for public interest many times neglects the discussions about the economy, the discussions about competition, the discussions about markets. And I think that I have in my career, I have been witnessing it, how conversations were in two separate tracks, conversations about the potential of data for social good, and conversations about data as something that will drive economies. In 10 years ago, we were in completely different directions, and that led to compartmentalization of policies. And that led to also very misinformed policies, very strict on privacy, without taking into consideration the openness of certain data sets. So I will start with a presentation just to frame the issue and telling you a little bit more about the Open Knowledge Foundation, because you might not know a lot about it, but I have to say to Moinul that it was actually born in Cambridge 20 years ago. So 20 years ago, we were having the considerations that now, seem like at the front pages. It was a very small group of technologists, basically, and professors and scientists thinking about the wonders that digitalization could bring to if we were designing principles that will unlock innovation, unlock the power of knowledge to benefit the many, and also to unleash power of the new technologies not as we see it today as unprecedented concentrated power, but as distributed power across different disciplines and different groups and different areas. Unfortunately, we are today, in a very different world than the world 20 years ago. There was a world of possibilities. If openness as the design principle would have prevailed, we wouldn't have the situation that we have today of only very few companies concentrating all the data power and all the keys to unlock the next wave of innovations. But we are still here, we're still trying, and we're still trying to make a difference, designing an alternative future where all have the opportunity to participate, to compete, to create, and to innovate. We are focused on three interrelated pillars. Communities, so we have a very interesting network from Japan to Finland, from Bangladesh to Brazil. We are present at the moment in 40 plus countries. We're still missing some member in India, so we hopefully through these activities we will reach out to the communities over there. And what this network does is very different. It is, of course, the digital reality of Brazil is very different from the reality of Nepal or of El Salvador. But we try to connect and discuss these kind of issues in an interdisciplinary manner, and from a comparative perspective. It's extremely useful to have, for example, Estonia sharing practices with Mexico in digitalization, or having Greece sharing how they are sharing their health data with communities that are in a very different latitude. But we are different from all the foundations in the sense that we make tech, and we make tech open technologies that will enable other actors to create the open data ecosystems that we are going to talk about today. And so we are different, as we do not depend exclusively, like on grants of beneficiaries. We are not only beneficiaries of grant programs, but we generate our income that we reinvest in the technologies that we are developing. So we are at the moment providing tools and services for opening data to different governments and organizations around the world. And that keeps us close to reality, because we are like close. Now it seems like 5 years ago, many of our clients have started the conversation of, we want this data to be AI ready. We want this data that we are harvesting and that we are keeping to be ready for the next wave of innovations. So we have been very aware of all the frictions that organizations and countries face when they want precisely to have their data ready and have the data infrastructures ready for the next steps to come. And we also do advocacy, but it's not the typical advocacy. Our advocacy is concentrated in openness. And with the, you have seen since I think 4 years ago, you find the word digital public infrastructure everywhere. But from it is missing the word open. So what we are advocating at the moment is for these new public systems to be open by design, which will lead to an ecosystem of openness that will hopefully unlock the power of data, but also unlock adaptable infrastructures so we can distribute the benefits of these technologies. So missions summarized: we advocate for open knowledge and data and open, participatory, accountable, and sustainable technologies for a better world. And so what we are going to talk today in this conversation is how access to data sets by smaller players can influence market participation, the financial barriers, but not only the financial barriers and technical barriers posed by the acquisition of large data sets. And if you cannot access those data sets, if you don't even know that the data sets exist, that absolutely blocks the potential to innovate and compete. And then we will move to the more utopia of large data commons and the role that a large data commons of AI-ready data can lead to democratize innovation and AI. So the reality that we are facing today is something that we read often in many reports, that the big actors already concentrate the power of data. And that many times I hear this statement that all data has been digitized, all data has been collected, there's not, all the power is already, like it is like a sentence saying, fatalistic sentence saying that it is done, all the data power is already concentrated, nobody can compete at this point, and there's no more data sources to get data to get from any source, because all is collected already, and that the AI market is already closed for the big actors to compete. And when I discuss that with my network, we realize the limited perspective of the big actors running the show on which data is collected, which data is not collected, and the missing, the blinding data blind spots that we are facing today. Because if I talk to each and every community that is member of Open Knowledge Foundation, we realize that there's precious data sets to be collected and created yet. And we have been even discussing how can we activate a way to create these data sets So these data sets are born open, and they're born open to share by many actors, and they are not. So we don't make the mistake that we made like 20 years ago, that it was we open everything so for a few actors to concentrate all the power. So how can we lock open in a new ecosystem of data? The second is the barrier of course, computational power and the massive amounts of data that are needed even for simple AI solutions. At the Open Knowledge Foundation, we are challenging this as well. Because, of course, if you want to create the next ChatGPT, of course, you need a massive amount of resources, and you need massive computational power, massive political power, an army of lawyers, and it gets really complicated. But we challenge this by saying that it is not necessarily like to having a flourishing AI market. You don't need to be like the clone of Silicon Valley. Another AI ecosystem, market ecosystem is possible, and I think that we need to depart from the idea that while of course you need a lot of access to a lot of data for this, we don't need that massive access to data that is producing the AI that we see today by the big actors. Middle actors and small actors could participate in if another type of ecosystem is enabled. And we have been facing this challenge in our work with designing new tools. And actually, we have discovered, like digging deeper, that yes, you need a lot of data, but sometimes the best AI solutions located in the needs of communities need a different kind of data sets. And a different kind of data sets that is more connected to the communities, as you have seen with the language models, and more connected to the needs. And what we have discovered here is the key role that open data, open government data can play in this. I'm going to expand on this area in a moment. But simple AI solutions might not need that massive amount of data and might be like viable business models that can contribute a lot to the local and to the regional economies. The other thing that we have discovered, and is something that we discovered, is a brick wall that we face with our work that we were trying to do with environmental data and AI, is that very specific data sets might be needed for deploying and fine-tuning systems. And sometimes we have a problem of privatized data that is of such importance and public interest that should be in the hands of all. And only one company holds that very specific data set, and the cost is like impossible. We were trying, like, just to calculate what will we need, but for a very simple AI powered climate solution, and a non-for-profit or a Ministry of Environment can never have that amount of money to buy those data sets. So one of the ideas that I'm going to expand later that we were exploring is, what if, the last 20 years have been the decades of access to information laws? What if we challenge the system with a new legislation that will let us activate the public bodies to produce the data sets that we need? Or if they cannot produce, if that data set already exists in the private sector, to force sharing of that specific data set. Think, for example, about the fires now. We have wildfires everywhere in the world. Think specifically like the thing that has been in the news in Los Angeles. Imagine, as everything is so privatized over there, imagine if key data sets of water bodies and key data sets of pollution were only in the hands of very few, and there was a way to create an alert system and prevent the fires from happening if those data sets were open. So that's what we have been thinking of, how we can, not only for the public interest, but for the solutions that need to emerge from the private or public-private partnerships, how can we unlock the power of very specific data sets? The European approach that has been taken for this, they are investing a lot of money in producing high value data sets and opening it for all. But of course, the effort is not enough, and the effort is just one time. So how can we generate a system that will stop that situation that only a private actor, and sometimes a private actor that is not even in our jurisdictions, hold the power of precious data sets that will unlock the innovation downstream. We had a meeting last year in Paris with many actors discussing what was the role of data in AI systems. And one of the things that small AI companies were discussing is how difficult it is for a small AI company to clear all the legal frictions from the data sets. It is incredibly the risk of a potential lawsuit, and the lack of metadata and the lack of indications that they can use a so-called public data set for creating the models is a big barrier. Of course, as I spoke earlier, these big companies have lawyers everywhere and can afford lawyers everywhere, can afford to go with an AI system that has not been cleared properly. I mean, authorities will take forever to analyze a legal case against the big AI5, but a small company, I mean, just a lawsuit will kill the project, basically. And we have been thinking about the legal frictions since 20 years ago. What we tried to design was a system to label our data sets open, not only by name, not only releasing this is an open data set, but by metadata. So one of the advantages of open data ecosystem is that it clears all the legal frictions. It signals clearly the terms and conditions of the data set, and it leads to a frictionless AI development. Of course, concerns in regard to data are multiple, from vertical integration, upstream or downstream, and abuse of dominant positions that I discussed before. But access to data is becoming access to the data that we need to start experiment is becoming a big barrier. So another concern when we talk about data is the data quality. There's a lot of data out there that is labeled as open data, and many governments have their open data portal. And when you see the quality of data is terrible and is not usable even for simple application, not even useful for a simple visualization online, let alone to use it for the creation of an AI system. So of course, what we are trying to advocate for is that when we talk about the open data as a key resource that could unlock the power of AI innovation, we are talking about high quality data, how quality open data that can freely used, shared, and built on by anyone, anywhere, for any purpose, but a data that is AI ready as well, a data that it's released according to standards and to metadata standards that will enable everybody using it, just use it without having, it cuts all the steps of preparing the data for an AI system, clearing it legally. It reduces all the frictions so as to have it just as a ready resource. But then we face the practicalities of this, because if you see the way that basically, if we go back to the history of open data, at the beginning, it was by a push from civil society, basically working on issues of democracy and accountability. So I think that the barrier was very low when data sets were released. So by just releasing it, it was celebrated as a victory, and all the technical aspects of that the data was actually useful and usable were neglected. A report from some years ago said that like around 82% of the data released as open data is not usable. So I think that, and I have to confess that one of the blocks is that it was framed as open data release for citizen accountability and for good governance. It was never framed in the last at least 10 years as this unique tool that will activate economic innovation, and it will activate an ecosystem of fair play among actors. So there's a lot of work. I mean, there's a lot of potential. If we think that this need for data is being developed in parallel of this new wave of digital public infrastructures, and these digital public infrastructures undoubtedly will collect vast amount of data from not only citizens, from both public data from the systems that are going to manage, from environmental to mobility systems. We are in front of a great opportunity to get the open data right, so it can serve the purpose that I'm trying to argue here of being a resource that small companies and local companies can use, not to compete with the giants of AI, of course, but to create their own solutions and to be participants of these AI innovation ecosystems. So how open data helps solve the problem of data unavailability, of non-affordability? For example, it can be that for public institutions, there's mandatory sharing of key data sets in equal terms for all actors. Here is all the ideas of legislative innovation, activating the citizen right to force the government or local government to produce data sets that are missing, or to mandate the opening of data sets that are not being shared. And open data commons might reduce both financial and technical barriers and solve difficulties for AI accountability. For example, if an AI system that is being deployed for a public function proves that it has been trained with publicly available open data sets, the auditability and the credibility of the system increases immediately, automatically, I will say. It also makes easy for the auditors from civil society, from consumer associations, from competition authorities easier to audit. And it also keeps AI rooted in the needs of communities it wants to serve. One of the problems, I come from Guatemala, we have 24 languages, and we have very different cultural dynamics than the dynamics of the US, for example. And sometimes the AI products and even the prompts, come with answers to our needs that are very, 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 very different from our culture and from what we need, actually. And so when, for example, if a government or if a group of regional governments dedicate resources to create an open data commons, for example, in health issues. If I think of, for example, skin cancer of indigenous communities in the Mesoamerican region, or biodiversity issues that are quite unique to the region, it keeps AI hours somehow, and it keeps the opportunity to use the technologies of our time and solve the problems of our time in our hands. Of course, if data is open, nothing will impede that the big actors also benefit from it. But the problem here is that I will say that we are competing in different leagues, and what it will enable is that not all some of the solutions will not be interesting. Just to mention, Facebook, Meta, for example, only has offices in the big markets that are of their interest. some of our local markets are not of interest for them. So perhaps some of the solutions that small companies develop will be so marginal for them, but so important for us that it will be possible to create an a local AI industry. And of course, in the utopic side of things, the transformative potential of a data commons, I think I see it more like when the private sector meets the public need. I think that if we enable an ecosystem of companies benefiting from data commons, for example, if these data pools are created around pressing issues like malnutrition of children, or problems of mobility, or environment, air quality, I think that where the need is, and if the state invests resources in enabling these data pools, I think that the public will be served better exponentially, and this is like a mix of competition and collaboration, actually. We are working at the moment in a big project at the foundation with CNRS in France, because we arrived to the conclusion that open data is not enough, that we need far more than just the open data to make all these things that I discussed happen. And we not only need interoperable legal tools. One of the block roads that we face is, I have talked mostly in this conversation about open data from the government, but actually there's also data that is very valuable that we need to open, that belongs to, for example, communities of patients suffering specific illness. It's very sensitive, or we need specific data that it lives in communities that might not be willing to share given the current state of things. And so we think that an open data commons can be something that is that renegotiates the terms and conditions for conditional sharing of some communities. So it's a little bit away from the initial definition of open data, but some data sets, precious data sets, might be open to certain companies and communities with conditional data sharing. And we want to make it interoperable with the broader open data ecosystem. We are also exploring governance tools, including a collective management mechanism based on data trust. And we will see what results from it. Technical tools. We need to fine tune and make what will be ideal is to translate that 80% of open data that is not usable for AI into usable data for AI to build the commons further. And one thing that and ways to signal better, and this is being discussed with the specific communities. It's very interesting. For example, we are sitting in roundtables with the open science community, and many of the global south scientists, they feel resentful. They say, we contribute all our data sets, and then we cannot access the data sets of people that are using the research that we are generating, and they get published in the best journals, and we are our data sets is not even attributed ever. So there's a lot of anger, I guess, of people who like 20 years ago unconditionally share and feel used. So we need to address those concerns if we think of creating an ecosystem. And just to conclude, open data is a power distributor. It, if enabled, can activate an innovation ecosystem, can enable small actors to start on equal footing. Of course, not equal footing for the big AI super powerful industries, but in equal footing in a local environment. But the most interesting thing is if we design an open data commons, the key will be like that, that you don't not only take, but you also give back. So to keep the system, to keep the resource growing and sustain the resource that favors all. Of course, it's very utopic, but of course, Open Data Commons is not a silver bullet. If an ecosystem is not created, to start, funding is needed. But more than funding is, like the will as a community to give small AI companies a chance and to value the contribution of AI companies and to start doing the things different. I think that one of the mistakes of AI companies is that many of the systems have been developed in rooms only with engineers. And in our experience, like developing this SICAN, which is the leading infrastructure for open data run by many governments, it is a system that has been very stable and has been used broadly for many years. I think that because when we designed it, we didn't design it alone. We sat down with the people in the government that were trying to open data, and we co-create and co-design the infrastructure. I think that in an ecosystem where local actors are heard and public sector can, give input, small companies, AI companies can take a chance. I think that we need a political commitment to sustain the data commons. Something that has happened is that precious data sets that were like available for the public and in great format simply disappear because hosting data is very expensive. And public administrations changed, and nobody was given the mandate to host the data sets. We think that one of the ideas that we have been flirting with at the Open Knowledge Foundation is that open data sets live at libraries, and the libraries have the catalog of data and make it available in the same way as they make available a book, for people to use. But it can also be like, if we think more ambitiously, maybe the key data commons should be by the Ministry of Economy or the area of government in charge of innovation, with a commitment to keep it going the same way that we keep going, highways. I think that we also need to explore enforceable rules, and I think that the competition law comes here into play to force data sharing in some cases. I think that some fixes, we will never, achieve getting hold of all the data accumulated by the AI giants, but key data sets that are needed to compete in specific areas should be forced to be shared, and some companies, I think that companies to operate in some markets should be forced to share that data. And I think that creative legislative approaches is the next thing. While I admire all the EU efforts with the AI Act and so on, I think that countries in the global south need different approaches, because we will never be able to, sustain that complicated. It happened with the GDPR and privacy and data protection. We need creative legislative approaches to and not to block innovation by excessive regulation that is completely disconnected with the reality of the companies that operate in our countries. And that's it for me. I'm open to discuss. I thank you for. I know that it sounds very utopic, but I think that it's possible. I think that it will be so nice, the same way that we have share resources for mobility or for shared parks. We have shared data commons, actually with the purpose of activating these ecosystems. Now, if you are in a country like mine, you either buy the data set or grab the data set without legal clearance. And if you are starting an AI company, like you will never start an AI company basically. And there's a lot of potential in the new generation of engineers. There's a lot of common infrastructure available now to start playing with offline AI models and doing very interesting things for our education systems, for our local companies, for customer service. But we can't. I mean, we can't, and we could with a little bit of political will and discipline, basically.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Renata. Thank you. And you are now going to be speaking to the right kind of people who have been in the thick of things and can give their experiences, because you have covered so many facets about open data sets, demolished so many myths about data, and also, as our report also showed, that maybe there is a chance, at least in the AI ecosystem, for small to be beautiful, because small data sets can perform roles for very, very specific needs. And of course, role of governments in creating these open data sets, and the role of industrial policy, because storage means there's so many things you have covered. It will be difficult for me to even summarize, but really, really very, very enriching talk. So I would just then now move on and ask my colleagues who have joined me from India, who are in the startup ecosystem. So I'll first request Aalekh, who is the head of Sarvam Enterprise and Strategy at the Founder's Office, where he leads the AI initiatives, to give his comments, his observations on open data sets. Of course, India has a very excellent AI mission under which AI open data sets are being encouraged. But over to you, Aalekh. Is he on mute? We can't hear him right now. So he had some technical issues. So I guess, Aalekh, I'll just...
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Yes.
Okay. Sorry about that. Thank you. Thank you for an excellent presentation, Renata, and thank you, Professor, for inviting us to this forum. On open data sets, I think it's a critical need, as was highlighted, to actually build a foundational ecosystem in India around AI. I think I'll speak from the point of view of foundational models and LLMs, because that's what we specialize in. For LLMs particularly, for pre-training, at least the need for annotated data is not there as much, but you still need curated data, you still need a high volume of in-date data. And at Sarvam, we've built pipelines where we've been able to synthesize a lot of this data to be used by others. In fact, we've made Samvad, which is one of our data sets, open. I think it was last year that we open sourced it. Some of Sarvam 1 is open source as well, right? So we do believe in the open source commitment. I think that's the ethos from which our founders come as well. They started AI for Bharat, and when they saw that for scale, right, of LLMs, we need more resources, essentially, to be able to train large-scale models for India. That's when this company was founded. We are working closely with the India AI mission, as you said. So some of these data sets, we are in live discussions with them to put on India AI, which will provide another surface for people to be able to download these data sets and train their own models on that. We also spoke about this earlier, but I think another critical angle is the government should also think of this as a public good. Another DPI in some sense, even though the data set itself, probably you won't be hosting the model on top of it, but that they may also do that. But I think making the data sets part of any DPI on AI is a good idea. And this is a corpora that will only increase and become richer with time. The second point I wanted to highlight is the importance of being able to access open models, synthesize data, and distill as well. I think we've reached a point where the delineation between data and models are much more is kind of blurred now, because a lot of the frontier models actually hold enough data within them that you're able to synthesize data sets as well from them, from some of the open models as well. So I think things are happening which, while while some countries are thinking about how do we sort of control the access to AI resources within their ecosystems, I think my view is that the cat is out of the bag. I mean, we're seeing DeepSeek, for example, being able to crush a bunch of benchmarks, right, without having access to the same resources. And I think to do that in a sustainable and safe fashion is very important. And I think having data sets is certainly critical in that.
Thanks, Aalekh. So, Nihar, we had a very long and a very fruitful discussion with you during our stakeholder consultation. And your experience with Project Vani, because as Renata had talked about, cultural specificities, so that it may not, so whether these open language models also are sensitive to cultural sensitivities and Indic languages. She was talking about many languages in the US, but I don't know, you are the best place to tell us how many dialects, how many languages are you dealing with when it comes to Project Vani?
How many is anyone's guess at the moment. I guess we'll just have to collect and see. And even then, it may not be holistic. But essentially, I think I concur with many points that we've heard from Renata and even Aalekh, because in some ways we're fighting sort of the same battles to get the models to understand the right data and feed the right data to the right model. It's a little bit of a chicken and egg problem from the place where we see. In addition to the points that I sort of heard, I just wanted to add one more thing, that while even at Vani, we're collecting broad domain agnostic data set, right, which is more useful to bring in to ensure that accessibility is there, to ensure that the dialects don't get lost in time, which brings in the cultural elements, which ensures that a population of, let's say, 20,000 folks speaking a tribal language in Chhattisgarh need to be represented fairly. In addition to that, just from the sake of proliferation, if I bring in the commercial angle, I think that there needs to be a way to give access to data set, but domain and context agnostic data set being open source seems to be of little use, in my opinion, or at least in my limited opinion, that we may need better data sets and narrower data sets than very broad, because something as broad as, let's say, Vani, right, may also end up being useful to a select few, and those select few are fast increasing, right? So just beyond the tech and FANG companies that we see, we now have many companies. Sarvam is one who have the ability to churn that broad data set, but we still have a lot of requests coming in from smaller players saying that we can't go out and seek and collect our own data sets, right? And for us to actually use something, it needs to be within our domain, needs to be within a particular setting, and along with annotation, the way Aalekh pointed out, that for at least for as the use case starts tending to get firmer, you need better annotation on the data set, right? So I think with this, I see the industry also heading towards the direction, or at least it's our responsibility to make it head towards the direction where dataset sharing is there across for a particular domain, right? Need not be across domains, but definitely for a domain. In one such project, it's a LLM assistant for frontline health workers. We see that potential, and we're working towards open sourcing a dataset where it's more towards public health and for the caregivers, in the sense frontline health workers and ANMs, as the target audience, which could then be useful for any startup working to make an application. Let's say Bihar or UP as a geography, Hindi speaking geographies, and making for those users. Those data sets would be much more useful than something which is very broad and useful only to big techs. Not sure if this sort of rings with all of you, but I think that's just my view.
Very important intervention, Nihar, because I believe here 2025 is going to be the year of small language models. Large language models are passé, and foundational models, which were an initial threat, so to speak, to democratization of this technology, that's my understanding, could be replaced with very curated language models, which would require curated data sets and very specific data sets. And so therefore, as a competition economist, I see a lot of hope in this ecosystem in comparison to the Web 2.0. Renata had some question.
Yes, no, just a comment that I fully agree, and that was missing from my talk. And something that I imagine is like, for example, the ecosystem of aid in many developing countries, like the providing, like, when social sector provides the last mile of assistance, frontline and workers and so on, we need to get them into data. And we need to get all the social sector into producing good data, because many that reach, like, the most isolated communities, sometimes it's churches, sometimes it's like, volunteers, and, like all the sector that is not commercial and not public, but is performing this function, can play a key role in contributing to this ecosystem. And it only takes, very simple tooling that we are working on at the Open Knowledge Foundation, very simple tooling that will produce the good quality data, and a lot of data literacy and AI literacy, even in those sectors, so they can understand they're contributing to something bigger that will make their work easier.
Yeah, Moinul, your academic viewpoint sitting in Cambridge and your experience in working in policy as a computer scientist. Please share your views on the topic.
All right. Thank you so much, Payal, for inviting me here. And really, I feel really super happy to be able to share some of my, observations here in this context. Thank you, Renata, for the really good, starting up the whole conversation. I would, so just to see it from my perspective, like more academic perspective, I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, that what we are going towards is a situation where the competition authorities will be fighting with the monopsonies rather than the monopolies that we actually think about. So the point is that, even if we think about, opening up data, think about, like, small companies coming up with small models, larger scale, and competing with the large scale models in very niche markets, etc. If we look at, like, who's the buyer of these things, we see that, it's just like a small number of companies. So for instance, just to compare it with, like, think about, like, what we have in Amazon. Like, Amazon is the only buyer of millions of producers. And so basically in that situation, you cannot, like, the competition authorities cannot even go and say anything to Amazon. I mean, in most cases, basically they just tap the back and everything. We know how it works. Now, when it comes to AI and monopsony, it actually creates two very difficult problems, which one from a very computational perspective, the other one is very social perspective. The first one, I would say that, from a computational perspective, is that, the algorithms that we actually design, the models that we actually train for the upper stream transfer learning models, they will be backed by the same colonial idealizations that we actually have been fighting for centuries. So, the models, if you actually think about, these are neural models, which are trained with data primarily from English, French, Spanish sources. Now, if you think from that perspective, thinking about how a beautiful person looks like, it is actually created by the Spanish, English, or in some extent, like, Russian sources, if we could actually say, not Indian sources. Now, that creates a huge ideological problem, a contextual problem of the pre-trained models that we are actually thinking about. Now, even if we talk about like small data revolution, even if we talk about like, things are done in the edge, these things will be using these pre-trained models. And what we'll be doing is like when we were producing data, just to actually, fight with those pre-trained models, giving them data from our sources, like the southern sources of Indian source or origin or South American origin or any other origin, we will be actually giving it to the same buyer. And the same buyer, like, those monopsony market, players, like 4 or 5 of them, will be actually taking the ideas. Now, they're the ones who actually does this regulatory capture thing. Now, we know who's actually in power in US now or in the European Union countries, etc. They have their specific ideology. Some symbols which are very venerated in our part of the world are super hated in their part of the world. I'm not using that word, but we all know what we are talking about. It's a very cultural symbol. Now, think about that perspective. Like what happens to our symbols when we actually are selling it to the same monopsony markets? Now, this is something that the competition authorities really need to think about. How do we actually get liberated from that? And so the second thing that actually comes from as a solution that I actually think is that instead of thinking about this term of deep learning, we should be thinking about a term called broad learning, a broad AI rather than a deep AI. A broad AI is an idea where we basically think about AI as an idea rather than AI as machines. And if you think in that way, then we basically will be able to actually compartmentalize, like, how we design the data, what data assets that we actually should be actually curating, and how we'll be curating, and who's going to be our buyer. So these things, I think, should be in our discussions, in our communications more often rather than like the ones that we are doing. I'll just end with one observation that Renata was talking about is, I mean, this. The whole point of like opening up data is to actually create a consensus, and you said like this is very rightly so, like there are people who are actually opening up a lot of data. We really don't know what to do with those data. I mean, from my knowledge, I'd say like I work with natural language processing and image processing kind of work, where we actually try to find out images that actually resemble our faces, our figures, and like Bangla. I focus on Bangla mostly, and in Bangla, like even if we have 200 million speakers, 300 million probably, it has like about 120 different dialects. Now, the problem with opening up data and just actually dumping Bangla data here in one place actually creates more problem than anything else, because we don't really think about the curation of the bias in the system. Is it a Calcutta Bangla or a Dhaka Bangla? Is it a Bangla which is akin to Ahamiya, or is it more towards Uriya? Now, these things are very important, and so I really thank you for coming up with that thing, that we really need proper curated data set that Nihar also talked about. And I don't know, I mean, like if we don't make the competition authorities to think in that perspective, I think we will be actually lost in AI jungle. Thank you so much.
So Moinul, you have raised two very important points. Nihar, do you want to, before I get back to Renata, do you want to answer about how you have raised your hand, how you are doing it and dealing with these multiple dialects and these issues?
Yeah, actually, interesting point, Moinul, that so Bangla being in Calcutta, Bangla being in, let's say, Bangladesh, and maybe some other regions in India, right? That's also a battle that we fight in many ways, and it's an uphill task to, let alone the government, to even make our own ecosystem understand that. And that's where Vani's sort of genesis or philosophy comes from. That language is a continuum; it's a fabric. You can't really say Bangla, Marathi, right? It doesn't work like that. And that's why we are anchoring it by geography. We currently have around 59 languages across 16,000 hours already open source. and around 50% of that is Hindi, right? As a speaker metadata, speaker is declaring that I have spoken Hindi. But and we often get this question that you are saying diversity, but 50% data is Hindi. But we need to understand what lies underneath the hood, right? That 50% of Hindi spans 80 districts, right? And maybe it will have its own bell curve, but it will definitely be across the thick of 40 or 50 districts. These are not the same Hindi. The speakers themselves are calling it Hindi, but when you actually listen to the audio, you can figure out, right? And through our systemic biases, we can point out the region as well. So absolutely agree to that. And the way we take care of that, to answer Payal's question, is we actually have a bank of folks from across the country from that particular district who actually listen to that language and validate it and give a thumbs up or a thumbs down before we open source it, so that we can concur.
Fascinating. Renata, you had some comment and observation.
Yes, very quick comments. I know I'm aware of the time. First, is responding to Moinul. First, we need a metadata revolution, basically. We don't need a data revolution, we need a metadata revolution. We really need to work across sectors to get the metadata right. And that's urgent, like. The second is we need a book by Mr. Zaber on broad AI. And that's, I love the concept. I want to hear more. I know that 1 hour is not enough. I want to read that book. I hope that is published, like or a paper, broad AI. I really like it. I want to learn more about it. And I want my team and the network to learn more about it. And the third is a flirty idea of a non-aligned foundational model. I think that, like the same way that there was the non-aligned movement, we need the non-aligned AI movement. We need to invest resources, like, pool resources to create our own models. Because if we will be dependent, we are at the very beginning of this, and we will be building our future systems on top of the basis of the oppressor, it's harder to revert. We need to leave that building and build our own things, like, and I think that is a worth investment, and it's not only a financial investment. I think that many developers and volunteers in the Global South will be willing to contribute, and it's a mega project that will bring unity and cohesion and a different proposal. And maybe it should be like bottom up instead of, like, directed by one government trying to lead everything. Maybe it will be a mix of both, but I believe that it is a necessary next step for competition and collaboration.
So, Renata, your talk has evinced so much of interest. We have some questions in the chat also, I believe. So I'm asking my colleague, Shiva, who has joined us. Shiva, could you just, one question I will read out, and then Mr. Chandrasekhar is there in the webinar chat, and I'll ask Shiva to read that. So one question which is from Venkatesh Haryanan. He has worked with us. He talks about the lack of attribution for open data usage is a big problem in AI. What are the possible solutions for this? Any one of you can take that question. And the other, Gautam Mishra says, how can we make sure that we correctly de-identify? So he's talking about personally identifiable information being stripped off information, so creating non-personal data sets, even from personal data sets, and anonymized data. I mean, this is my pet peeve also, because there's so much of private and personal data set lying around, but it can be anonymized, and high-value non-personal data sets can be created from individuals, specifically the vulnerable, anonymized data sets from the vulnerable population. Shiva, if you could read.
I'll read out a question that Mr. Chandrasekhar has posted in the chat. He says, open data will mainly come from governments at all levels, federal, state, and local. Obviously, companies that have strong technical capabilities and other vast data sets will be best placed to benefit from open data. So only those data sets that large players have no interest in may be useful to small private companies to create innovative and competitive AI-based solutions. Everything seems to boil down to the intent of governments to open up data sets available with them and additionally allocate scarce public financial resources to curate, annotate, and structure those data sets and then host them. As far as private players are concerned, almost all of them regard data as their competitive edge. So forcing them to share is well nigh impossible. Would you agree?
So Renata, would you want to take the last question first?
Yes,
Only
think
governments, and it will be very difficult to ask private companies to share their proprietary data or the data sets which they have collected.
I think that that's the challenge of competition authorities, and that's why I need a lot of literacy inside competition authorities and also the judiciary to understand that competitive advantage that blocks everybody else from competition. And I'm not aware of precedents of forcing open data sets, but I think that we need to, as we go, we need to study the cases, find good ways to provide evidence. And I think that building evidence for competition authorities, I guess that once one competition authority starts, the ball starts rolling and others will follow. And once we have it might take years, of course, once we have a body of decisions by competition authorities activating this right and proactive legislative approaches when people are when new countries are starting or states are starting to regulate AI, including these provisions, I think that is when we will see it happening. Of course, it seems impossible now, but it is necessary and urgent. It is something that cannot be delayed, in my opinion, because there's no other way out. And competition authorities need to evolve in their mandate and exercise their powers and fulfill their mission.
So Renata, this question from Venkatesh on the lack of attribution for open data is a big problem. Do you have any solutions to offer or any suggestions from any experiment internationally?
At the moment, nothing comes to my mind. I'm sorry, but it's a question that I will take home and ask around to colleagues. And I will be writing a wrap up of this panel as a blog post in Open Knowledge Foundation website. So I hope I can answer it adequately. I don't want to improvise without enough knowledge. Yeah. Sorry.
Nihar or anyone else on the issue of anonymization of data, because there's so much of personal data. So can that, who will create those data sets? So as Mr. Chandrasekhar is saying, can those data sets then be created by the government, the personal data sets, in, of course, through a public-private partnerships? And means, of course, that we have discussed the aspects of you may not need, even small data sets would be useful, but that apart, the personal data to be anonymized and personally identified information being stripped off, who will do that? Who will take that initiative? It is not a private sector initiative, which the private sector would be wanting to take because there's no profit in it.
Yeah, I think it's also in some ways a regulatory responsibility, not just to ensure that the data with any amount of PII or sensitive data is shared outside. In many ways, I also foresee this as a separate industry coming in, which is focused only on solving this use cases, right? The way we have, let's say, the physical security agencies today, if I may call it that way. I see that coming into play. The role with the government, I'm not fully sure of how they'll play. I think at a more governance or a facilitating the ecosystem level, sure, I do foresee them to play a role. But it's been a challenge to get any sort of data from the government, and for the right reasons, right? It's a nascent industry, and we don't have it's not mature yet, so it's difficult for them to share as well, which is understandable. But it's a chicken and egg problem that we have to solve. The private players need to solve.
Yeah, Aalekh, you had a point to, and so before we wrap up, could we hear you? Because one question which came up was very important, was about because you are using Llama open model, whether that pre-trained data set, in the sense, how are you contextualizing for India? And does then therefore India need to have, and that's the biggest debate in India, that have its own large language model, which is more contextual and more India-specific, both culturally and language. Language means in the sense we are multicultural, etc. Will that be required?
No, let me come to your point first, and then I had a separate point to make. So on the front of contextualization, right, we believe that fine-tuning will be required for many contexts, right? So you can't use Llama directly if you want a strong focus on Indic languages, if you want to make it work, for example, in strategic sectors. There's a lot of work you have to do to fine-tune it. Eventually, I think there is a strong need, and we discussed this with the minister as well as everyone in India AI Mission on building a sovereign model. And I think the important thing to remember is that there are so many licensing terms even for Llama models, right? I mean, it's called open source, but it does not take it. And we had this discussion before, Dr. Malik, right, in your previous session. But it is not really open source under some standards, right? And so they can also stop coming out with Llama releases at some point, right? After that, what do you do? So I think there is a need to have not just a foundational model, which is like either Indian or for the global South, right? But or a concerted effort, but also the mechanism to keep updating it, and that requires us to kickstart this motion, right? So if you have a few models, then other people build models. At Sarvam, we don't want to be the only one building models, right? Let's encourage other people to build it. Let's be competitive, and let's have an ecosystem where we're able to continuously improve these models. The other reason why this is so important is more even from a strategic angle, right? There's a reason why our previous governments did not sign something like the nuclear proliferation treaty and all of that, because we believe that we should have our own standing. And I think that's even important in LLMs, right? They will become strategically extremely important in the next few years. And if, for example, end users also being controlled, and in some ways, the new order that US has come out with, right, to exceed a certain number of GPUs, there is end use verification that has to be done. So we have to, I think, in my opinion, think of ways to be self-reliant in the field of generative AI, and that includes the capacity and ability and the data sets to be able to train our own models. The other point I wanted to make was we've been talking about training data for a while. What is also turning out to be very important is evaluation data, and we have a member in our team who's working only on that aspect across Sarvam. But the reason evaluation data is very important is it's very easy to set up a POC in the field of generative AI, right? And I'm sure folks who have been working in this area will be aware. But for things to move into production, you need to refine the system quite a bit, because it is not it's not a deterministic system like previous attempts, like previous software systems. So that is another realm of data that we should be thinking about. How do we collaborate in that regard? Because while some of it will be very company specific, there could be use case specific evals that we can create a data set of, so that anyone who is building a system in that particular use case can use these data sets to improve their system. And the way you'll improve it is in terms of the prompting architecture. Maybe you'll need to fine tune certain aspects of your model better. But these things will become important when we actually deploy. Right? And I don't think we've reached that stage yet, except for a few use cases around voice. Obviously, people are implementing, but in terms of enterprise AI, workflow automation, we've not really reached that stage where people are moving into production at scale. And I think this is one of the barriers as well.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. I don't know whether there's another question in the chat, but we are really running out of time. There is another meeting scheduled in this room, and I think it was an extremely rich discussion. Thanks to a very, very comprehensive presentation which Renata made before we opened up for discussion, and she has covered so many aspects. And perhaps we can have a small closed door meeting with a few people who are very much interested in this topic and discuss it more at length at a later time. Thank you from the ICRIER Process Center to Renata, to Aalekh, Nihar, and Moinul, and all those who have joined because it was a webinar format. Thanks for joining. Hope to have more of these kinds of deep dives into the minutiae of AI, going away from generalities. Thanks, Renata, and thanks to all.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you all. Bye bye.